Emily Thompson's life seemed picture-perfect from the outside. A comfortable home, a loving husband named Richard, and their beautiful 8-year-old daughter Lily were all she had ever wanted. For 13 years she poured her heart into building a family, believing that their love would endure any challenge. She thought she had everything, until the night her world came crashing down. It started with a phone call. Richard had been acting distant for months, coming home late, keeping his phone close and avoiding her gaze during dinner. Emily had tried to convince herself it was just work stress, but deep down she knew something was wrong. That night, as she scrolled through her social media feed, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I thought you should know what your husband has been up to. A friend." Attached was a photo. It showed Richard holding a toddler in his arms, his face beaming with pride. Standing next to him was a young woman with bright blonde hair and striking green eyes. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she noticed the little girl's face. She had Richard's smile, Richard's eyes, and a striking resemblance to Lily. Her hands shook as she stared at the photo, her mind racing. The message was followed by another text. "They've been together for 6 years. He has a second family." Emily felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. 6 years. 6 years of lies. She had spent more than half a decade living in a carefully constructed facade, believing her husband's promises, trusting his every word. And now she wasn't just losing her husband, she was losing her sense of self. Emily confronted Richard the next morning. She didn't bother with subtlety or tact, she wanted the truth and she wanted it now. "Who is she?" she demanded, throwing the photo onto the dining table. "Don't you dare lie to me, Richard." For a moment he looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then, to Emily's astonishment, his expression shifted to something almost resigned. "Her name is Charlotte," he admitted quietly. She's someone I've been seeing." "Seeing?" Emily's voice cracked. "You have a daughter with her, Richard. This isn't some fling. This is a second life." "I never meant for it to happen," he said, his voice low. It just did." Emily couldn't believe the audacity of his words. He made it sound so casual, as if accidentally creating a second family was a forgivable mistake. "And what about me? What about Lily? Did we mean so little to you?" "You and Lily mean everything to me," Richard said, his tone defensive. "But Charlotte, she gave me something I wasn't getting here." Emily felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She stormed out of the house, leaving Richard with his pathetic excuses, and drove aimlessly for hours. When she finally pulled into a gas station to collect herself, she opened her phone and did what she had been avoiding. She searched for Charlotte's social media profile. What she found left her breathless. Charlotte wasn't just young and beautiful, she was eerily similar to Emily. Her smile, her facial structure, even her mannerisms in photos mirrored Emily's in a way that was almost unsettling. It wasn't just Charlotte who bore a resemblance either. Her daughter, Ella, could have been Lily's little sister. They shared the same nose, the same eyes, the same mischievous grin. Even their names were nearly identical. Emily sat in her car, her hands trembling as she scrolled through photo after photo. It was as if Richard had taken her life and replaced her with a younger, shinier version. The realization left her feeling hollow. She wasn't just betrayed, she had been erased. The divorce was swift and brutal. Richard didn't fight Emily for custody of Lily, though he made it clear he wanted to remain in their daughter's life. "I'm not walking away from Lily," he said during one of their tense exchanges. "No matter what happens between us, she's still my daughter." Emily wanted to scream at him. How could he claim to love Lily while playing house with another child who was practically her twin? But she bit her tongue. She didn't want Lily to grow up hating her father, no matter how much Emily despised him. Once the divorce was finalized, Richard moved in with Charlotte. Emily tried to shield herself from the details, but the small town they lived in made it impossible to escape the whispers. People gossiped about how Richard had traded up, how Charlotte was the perfect new wife, how their blended family was so modern. Emily heard it all, and every word felt like a dagger to her heart. The final blow came when she saw a photo of Richard and Charlotte's wedding. It popped up on her social media feed, courtesy of a mutual friend who apparently thought Emily needed to see it. In the photo, Charlotte was wearing a sleek white dress, her hair styled in loose waves, while Richard stood beside her, grinning like a man who had never broken a vow in his life. Between them stood their daughter, Ella, and Lily. Emily's blood ran cold. She zoomed in on the photo, her heart pounding as she took in the sight of her own daughter standing beside her ex-husband's new family, holding Ella's hand as if they were sisters. Emily felt something dark rise within her, something she hadn't felt before. Bigger. Pure, unrelenting anger. It wasn't enough that Richard had betrayed her. He had replaced her, stolen her daughter's innocence, and paraded his new life as if she had never existed. Emily knew she couldn't undo the past, but she could make sure Richard and Charlotte didn't get to live their fairy tale without consequence. For weeks, she quietly gathered information, biding her time as she planned her next move. She reached out to friends who had connections in town, listened carefully to every piece of gossip, and even hired a private investigator to dig into Charlotte's past. What she found was a goldmine. Charlotte's seemingly perfect life had cracks, financial troubles, shady business deals, and a string of questionable relationships before Richard. Emily also discovered that Charlotte's ex-boyfriend had recently resurfaced, claiming he had never stopped loving her. Armed with this information, Emily set her plan into motion. She anonymously sent letters to Richard, hinting at Charlotte's secrets and suggesting that she might not be as loyal as she seemed. She also arranged for Charlotte's ex to accidentally run into Richard at a local event, ensuring that their conversation would plant seeds of doubt. It didn't take long for the cracks in Richard and Charlotte's marriage to widen. Richard became suspicious, questioning Charlotte about her past and accusing her of hiding things from him. Charlotte, in turn, grew defensive, insisting that Emily was behind the sudden wave of rumors. Emily watched it all unfold from a distance, her satisfaction growing with every argument she heard about. For the first time since her life had fallen apart, she felt a sense of control. Eventually, the tension between Richard and Charlotte reached a breaking point. Richard discovered that Charlotte had been secretly meeting with her ex-boyfriend, and though she insisted it was innocent, Richard's trust was shattered. Their picture-perfect life began to crumble, and Richard found himself alone once again. Meanwhile, Emily had been working on rebuilding her life. She found a new job in a neighboring city, enrolled Lily in a school where she could make new friends, and even started dating again. Slowly but surely, she began to find happiness on her own terms. One day, as Emily was walking through a park with Lily, she saw Richard sitting alone on a bench. He looked tired, older, and lost in thought. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Emily felt a pang of pity for the man who had caused her so much pain. But then she turned away, taking Lily's hand as they walked toward their new future. Emily had spent too long living in the shadow of Richard's betrayal. Now she was finally free. And as she watched Lily laugh and play in the sunlight, she knew that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was living a life filled with love, strength, and joy. She had been replaced once, but she would never let it happen again. Months passed after Emily had seen Richard on the park bench, and the image of his defeated demeanor stayed with her longer than she cared to admit. Though she had told herself she had moved on, the remnants of her anger lingered like the ashes of a fire she hadn't quite put out. For years she had carried the weight of betrayal, and even though she was free from him now, the scars he left were slow to heal. Richard's marriage to Charlotte crumbled completely. It turned out that Emily's hints and Charlotte's secrets had not only exposed cracks in their relationship but had created a chasm neither of them could cross. Richard eventually filed for divorce, leaving Charlotte to fend for herself. Emily felt vindicated hearing the news, but her satisfaction was short-lived. Revenge hadn't brought her the closure she'd expected. It had simply made her feel empty. Meanwhile, Lily had started asking more questions about her father's absence. "Why don't we see Daddy anymore?" she asked one evening as Emily tucked her into bed. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to explain such a complicated situation to an 8-year-old. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," she said gently. "And when they do, it's better for everyone to have some space." "But I miss him," Lily said, her voice small. "And I miss Ella too." The mention of Ella caught Emily off guard. She hadn't realized how much of a bond Lily had formed with her half-sister. The thought stung. How could she let her daughter miss a child who symbolized everything Emily had lost? But as she looked at Lily's tear-filled eyes, Emily realized that her own bitterness shouldn't dictate Lily's relationship with her father or with Ella. "Maybe we can talk about visiting them," Emily said, forcing a smile. "Would you like that?" Lily's face lit up. "Really? You'd let me see Ella?" Emily nodded, though her stomach twisted with unease. She wasn't doing this for Richard or for Charlotte, she was doing it for Lily. Whatever pain she carried, she couldn't let it poison her daughter's happiness. Arranging the visit proved to be more complicated than Emily had anticipated. When she called Richard, he sounded surprised but not ungrateful. "You're really okay with this?" he asked. "I'm not doing it for you," Emily said bluntly. "I'm doing it for Lily." Richard sighed. "Fair enough. Thank you though. Ella misses Lily too." The day of the reunion was awkward, to say the least. Emily brought Lily to a park where Richard was waiting with Ella. Charlotte was conspicuously absent, a fact that gave Emily a grim sense of satisfaction. As soon as the two girls saw each other, they ran into each other's arms, giggling and twirling as if no time had passed. Watching them, Emily felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Nostalgia? Regret? Or maybe it was the realization that the bond between the two girls was innocent and pure, untouched by the betrayal that had torn their families apart. Richard approached Emily cautiously, his hands shoved into his pockets. "I wasn't sure you'd ever agree to this," he said. "Thank you for giving them this chance." Emily crossed her arms, keeping her distance. "Don't read too much into it, Richard. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you. I don't expect you to," he said, his tone earnest. "I just want to do right by the girls. They deserve that much." As they watched Lily and Ella play, Emily couldn't help but wonder if Richard truly meant it. Could a man who had betrayed her so thoroughly ever truly change? Or was this just another attempt to salvage his broken pride? While Emily focused on rebuilding her life, Charlotte's world was falling apart. After the divorce, she struggled to maintain the image of the glamorous, carefree woman Richard had fallen for. Financial troubles mounted, and without Richard's support, she found herself drowning in debt. The young and vibrant woman who had once replaced Emily was now a shadow of her former self. But Charlotte wasn't one to go down without a fight. She began to contact Richard, using Ella as leverage to manipulate him into helping her. "She needs her father," Charlotte would say, her tone dripping with desperation. "You owe her that much." At first, Richard complied, but as Charlotte's demands grew more frequent and erratic, his patience wore thin. One evening, after a heated argument, he called Emily. "I don't know what to do about Charlotte," he admitted, his voice strained. "She's out of control. She keeps using Ella as an excuse to pull me back into her mess." Emily couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. Charlotte's perfect facade was finally crumbling. But as much as she wanted to gloat, she also felt a strange sense of pity. Charlotte had stolen everything from her, only to end up just as broken and lost as Emily had been. "Maybe you should take full custody of Ella," Emily suggested cautiously. "If Charlotte's not stable, it might be the best thing for her." Richard was silent for a moment. "You really think I can handle that?" "You're her father," Emily said firmly. "It's time you started acting like one." Richard took Emily's advice, and after a contentious legal battle, he was granted full custody of Ella. The change was difficult for everyone, but it brought a sense of stability that had been missing for far too long. Ella and Lily grew closer, their bond becoming stronger with each passing day. Watching them, Emily began to realize that her anger toward Richard and Charlotte no longer served her. The girls were happy, and that was what mattered most. Meanwhile, Charlotte disappeared from their lives. Rumors swirled that she had moved to another city, leaving behind the chaos she had created. Emily felt no sympathy for her. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. As for Emily, she found herself in a surprising new chapter of her life. During one of Lily and Ella's playdates, she met a man named Daniel, a single father who had also been through a messy divorce. Their connection was instant, built on mutual understanding and a shared desire to create a better future for their children. Daniel was everything Richard wasn't: kind, patient, and genuinely devoted. For the first time in years, Emily felt what it was like to be truly valued. She and Daniel began to build a life together, blending their families in a way that felt natural and right. Years later, Emily stood in the audience at Lily's school recital, watching as her daughter and Ella performed together. The girls were inseparable now, their bond stronger than ever despite the complicated history that had brought them together. Richard sat a few rows away, smiling proudly at both of his daughters. Emily caught his eye, and for the first time, there was no anger or bitterness between them, only understanding. They had both made mistakes, but they had also both grown from them. And though their relationship would never be what it once was, They had found a way to coexist for the sake of their children. As the recital ended and the crowd applauded, Daniel took Emily's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. She looked at him and smiled, grateful for the second chance at happiness she had found. Emily had spent years consumed by anger and betrayal, but now she realized that she had something far more valuable: peace. She had risen above the pain, rebuilt her life, and created a future filled with love and hope. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She was free. And that was the greatest revenge of all.